Being LGBTQIA+ in a 12-step program for drug and alcohol addiction can present unique challenges that require sensitivity and understanding. One of the main obstacles is the potential lack of inclusivity and representation within the program. Many LGBTQIA+ individuals may struggle to find relatable stories or experiences that mirror their own, which can lead to feelings of isolation and disconnection. It is crucial for the program to create a safe and supportive environment where LGBTQIA+ members can openly share their experiences without fear of judgment or discrimination. Tonight, we talk about being LGBTQIA+ in recovery.
The backbone of the Recovered podcast is our premium subscribers. Our premium members sustain the Recovered podcast and allow us to be online and available to the new person in recovery. If you agree that serving the new person is important, then consider joining us, premium subscribers, in this 12-step work. In addition, upgrading to premium will give you access to our back catalog of over 1,300 episodes. Because of premium members, we are self-supporting through our own contributions. For more information, just go to recoveredcast.com and tap on the premium membership button. If you'd like official Recovered Podcast t-shirts, coffee mugs, and water bottles, then consider becoming a sustaining partner with us here at Recovered. For more information, just go to recoveredcast.com and tap on the Sustaining Partners button. This week, Martin, Becky, Kim, Shelly, Jim, Schez, Vicki, and Penny, well, they made their Sustaining Partner donations, so thank you very much, Martin, Becky, Kim, Shelly, Jim, Schez, Vicki, and Penny. This episode is sponsored by Kirk, Gigi. They use the donation button found on our website at recoveredcast.com. So Kirk, and Gigi, this episode is for you. Imported from Detroit, we are Recovered. Welcome to Recovered, and welcome to episode number 1354. And we call it Recovered because this is a show about people who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. My name is Mark, and I'll be your host, and along with me is Adrian, Barsha, and Tasha. How are you people?
Hey, Mark.
Hey. So pull up a couch and join us on this journey called life.
Now remember, we at the Recovered Podcast, we don't speak for any 12-step community. We only try to share our experience, strength, and hope in this life of recovery. So we are not a secret society, but we do try to remain anonymous.
We're not here to talk about the podcast, but we're here to let's do
the podcast.
Let's do this podcast. All right, Tasha, tonight the topic is being LGBTQIA+ in recovery. The intersectionality of being both LGBTQIA+ and in recovery can be a challenge. Research from the National Institute on Drug Abuse shows that LGBTQIA+ populations are disproportionately impacted by drug and alcohol addiction. Queer individuals often face additional layers of stigma and discrimination that can impact their journey towards sobriety. Internalized homophobia, transphobia, and the need to navigate societal expectations and norms can create added stress and emotional burdens. It is vital for the program to foster a culture of acceptance and understanding, providing resources and support specific to the challenges faced by LGBTQIA+ individuals in recovery. All right, as an introduction, why don't we go around the room and say and ask and answer, how do you identify and what are your pronouns? Go to you first, Adrian.
Adrian, I identify as non-binary, trans feminine. I use they, them pronouns.
Sweet.
Yeah.
How about you, Barsha?
I am Barsha. I use she, they pronouns.
And Tasha?
Yes, my name is Tasha. I am an alcoholic. I am a trans, non-binary person. I'm also pansexual.
Awesome. My name is Mark. I am an alcoholic, and I don't know. He, him are my pronouns for sure. Cis, straight, white, male, boomer. How's that?
That's great.
All right. It's
Glad to be with
have
you
all here. Such an important topic. I've been so excited about this. Tasha, you and I have been talking about this for a couple months. So thank you so much for setting this up. Appreciate it. You bet.
Thank you. No, I'm really, really glad we're
Such
doing
a learning experience for all of us. So I appreciate that. But so I'm going to go to you first, Tasha. I'll let you lead to show our friends around the corner here, around the block. So let's talk about, your gender identity and your sexuality and how they intersect. Did you use drinking as a way of coping? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think for me, I probably didn't know that for a long time, but I certainly came into the world feeling a little bit different. I grew up in Seattle in the 80s and 90s, so it wasn't completely out of the blue, that like my mom was in musical theater. She was an opera singer. She had fallen in love, unfortunately, with some gay men who were trying to hide who they were. So, my family was fairly accepting of gay people. But in the 80s and 90s, there was much less, I would say with respect to like sexual identity, I had as models gay or straight or bisexual, none of which I entirely identified with because I knew that I was always attracted from the age of a very young kid to people of all genders, but it didn't feel like 50% women and 50% men, which is always what I thought of with bisexual. And then with respect to my gender identity too, I always felt out of place with other little girls. And I always felt like I was the kid that people bullied and called, I don't want to use the word, but like called a lesbian essentially, and just told me I dressed like a boy or I dressed weird or whatever. And so I didn't fit in, and like so many of us addicts and alcoholics, I think it's really common to hear that we feel like we don't fit in many ways. And for me, drinking and using was a way to make myself feel like I did fit in. So it certainly intersected. The drinking was a way to cope with those feelings of not fitting in. And for me, my gender identity and sexual orientation were a part of that.
So I'm very curious. So I am curious about many things, but specifically on this topic and how things come to be. So Tasha, I'm interested, you're coming into adolescence, those formidable years when you are having all these feelings. Was there someone you could talk to about that? How did you navigate that?
I did not have the type of family where we were encouraged to talk about our feelings or experiences. My sister was going through her own difficulty. I have an older sister, and then my mom and dad both worked quite a bit, and my dad was struggled with some depression, and my mom worked a lot. And so it wasn't within my family. I would say that after I got to high school, I started to meet other people who understood my ideas and feelings around gender and sexuality. So that's really where I started to be able to share with others. One of my first girlfriends in high school, her mom was dating women at the time. And I remember that being really important for me, just to have a model of adults who were doing that and how it was portrayed as normal, because we didn't have that many representations on TV and movies. We had some, but nothing like we have today.
Adrian, I'm going to go to you next, and welcome to the virtual studio. It's so good to have you here. Welcome. So I'm going to ask the same question. I'm going to go to you, Barsha, on the same question, but I'd like you to follow up a little bit. What was your experience regarding your sexuality, your gender identity, and how it played out in your alcoholism or your drug addiction? How did that work? Did you use that to cope? What was your experience?
Yeah, definitely. So, I grew up in the Midwest in
Give you a bell ring.
The early 2000s. So, was still like, it was a time where people were in general more accepting, but the community I was from wasn't very accepting, and a lot of people were very openly homophobic. And so I remember when I was 14 or 15 and just sort of started having feelings towards other men, I immediately registered it as like something that was bad, because that's what everyone around me like communicated to me, was that was a bad thing. And it was just like an unavoidable thing. Like I kept having those feelings. Gender identity came a bit later, but I will say that just that anxiety around like, oh, am I gay? Am I this? Am I that? In a society or in a community where people just really did not accept those types of people, in the Midwest in Kansas, it played a huge role in just me first picking up. When I first started using, it was to escape a lot of those thoughts and feelings and racing thoughts around my gender and sexuality. And so even though it wasn't something that I didn't actually come out until after I got sober, I do think it was something that played a pretty big role in my using.
Adrian, as a follow-up question, I'm wondering about this. So you're in this struggle. There's people telling you it's bad, and there's some struggle going on. So you're using drugs and alcohol in order to cope. Did it work? Did it work at first? Did it fall deeper in depression? Did you act out into your sexuality? What was that like? How did drugs and alcohol play in that?
I'll say it worked at first. When I was in high school, it definitely took my mind away from a lot of those thoughts, which was, almost every day it was like me trying to tell myself I wasn't gay, or that was all the language that I had. I didn't really have too much language around, gender identity, or, what is like bisexual or pansexual. Pretty much in my town, like if you were bisexual, you were gay. That was how people viewed it. And so I will say that it took my mind away from a lot of those just fears around that, and it allowed me to suppress a lot of those feelings that I had, and just sort of like not confront them. When I did get later into my drinking and using, and I moved to New York, it was sort of something where I was in a more accepting place. And so I do think then, and I was in college at the time, then it allowed me to be able to explore my sexuality more, but still at the same time, I wasn't being honest with people about it. I was able to admit it to myself, but the layer of like admitting it to other people was completely different. So,
Adrian, what was it like coming out to your parents?
It was hard. It was again something I didn't do until I got sober. So, it was, and my parents are both very accepting people. They always communicated that to me. But just like there was a fear that I had from both of them that they would view me differently, that I, wasn't the son that they raised, all those sorts of things that they didn't necessarily tell me, but I told myself because of where I was living. And so it was challenging, but it was like, I don't think I had the experience that so many other people do. Both my parents are very accepting, and I have a good relationship with them now. So I do think I am privileged in that sense.
Barsha, welcome to the virtual studio. It's good to see you. Good to have you here.
Hey, fellow
Hey,
boomer.
welcome. So I'm not all alone. All right. So, Barsha, same question. What was it like for you dealing with your sexuality, your gender identity? I think it's mostly sexuality, right? That's more the issue here. How did your addiction play in that? How did you use it to cope? What was your experience?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me here. Interesting because I, as a boomer, remember I was born in 1959. And so coming up, I feel like I kind of felt kind of my sexuality around high school, I would say, but I always, those days, there were no such thing as identifying pronouns, first of all, with gender identity at all. There was nothing like that. There was just sexual identity. And so I feel like, when I went to college, and I was a musician as well. And so there was a lot of free attitudes about that, being a musician, and especially in conservatory, people were kind of coming out privately. But then when I got to New York City is when I really, when I got sober in New York City, I was really exploring what I needed to explore as far as my identity and my recovery, because I immediately, upon getting sober, sought out the LGBTQIA plus, and there were not all those letters, by the way, at that time. I'm glad they are now. But I immediately searched for the LGBTQ center on West 13th Street. I immediately opened, we had books. We did not have the internet. So we had, books that we looked in for meetings. I would circle my meetings, and I circled as many of the women and queer meetings, and we didn't even use that word really a lot. And it's funny because I didn't really talk about what my identity is, and I actually, and I hope it's not a trigger for anybody, identify as a dyke rather than a lesbian. That's my identity, and I'm also queer. So I really found that in recovery, that I had to actually, I would say, fully come out in recovery. I had my toe outside the door before I came into the rooms. And then I thought, I'm not going to be able to live with myself. And in those days, a record career, which is what I was going to try to get a record deal, you don't really come out. There were a lot of people in the entertainment business long before Rock Hudson broke open the whole thing who did not come out. And we knew who they were, but they did not come out. So you just followed that lead. So I said, no, if I'm going to have a career and I'm not going to use drugs and alcohol, I better stay in the closet to that extent publicly. But I was out to myself and my family.
So Barsha, when did you come in? When did you come into the program? What's your sober date?
My sober date is September 3rd, 1989.
So 1989. So it sounds to me you were fortunate that you were in a densely populated area and that there were these communities available to you. I mean, what did people do, or what do people do when they're not so blessed that they're in this that this community is not nearby? What would you recommend there?
Well, in this day and age, Zoom. Frankly, I mean, if you can't find a live meeting where it's labeled as safe as we can get, a safe space, LGBTQIA plus, if you can't find it, then I would say international Zoom is a real thing these days. And you will find a meeting every hour of the day, just the way it was in New York City, by the way.
Barsha, do you have a safe site that you would recommend?
I just go on to 24-hour AA rooms, something like that. I Googled it. I literally Googled it. And I found rooms all over the world, specifically LGBTQIA plus. I always look for that. I always I just put it into that specific site, and then I go in.
All right, listeners, if you find yourself in this specific place and maybe you're not having success online, feel free to reach out to me, mark@recoveredcast.com, and I'll plug you into someone that can help you along in this journey, because it is so important. As I've come to hear, that is, well, it's my experience that I need to be in community. I need to be in community in order to find recovery. And I think that's universal, right? And so we need to find that safe spot. And so I want the Recovered podcast to be that for you. I want to be able to link you into people that can help you when you find yourself in that situation. Mark@recoveredcast.com. I'm going to go back over to you, Tasha, and let's talk about the first time coming into the room. I think there's a couple first times for you, right? There was a relapse in there, Tasha. And what was it like the very first time coming in as a queer person? Did you realize you were as such at that point? But what was it like for you to come into recovery, coming into the halls of Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever 12-step group you identify with? What was that like? First.
Yeah, sure. So my recovery journey has involved a number of different fellowships. So I knew that I was at the time I used the term bisexual, which is how I identified that I, had relationships with both men and women. I came out as such, when I was 14 to my parents. And I entered recovery rooms in 2012 when I started going to Overeaters Anonymous, or OA, in Pittsburgh. And at that time, I wasn't even aware that there's more different types of food-oriented programs. It was just the only one that I'd heard of, and I heard that they could help me with all kinds of issues, because I certainly had compulsive overeating, but I had a history of bulimia and anorexia as well. And I think I've shared before on this podcast that initially I was really happy that I was a compulsive overeater, because it meant I could still drink, but that didn't last very long. But at the time, I just went to the meetings that were available to me. I tended to feel most comfortable in meetings with older people, which is the population, honestly, that I found. Probably because of my, history of having somewhat neglectful parents and just looking for parental figures. And I didn't talk about my sexuality, I would say, very much in the rooms. I didn't talk. I think I may have mentioned that at that time I was going through the disillusion of a relationship. It was a long-term monogamous marriage with a man, and part of my drinking and using and difficulty owning my own identity was all wrapped up in that relationship. So I think that, I was I was not being honest in that relationship in a number of different ways. And I probably talked about the difficulty of leaving that relationship, because it really had been, it had been a 15-year relationship that I entered when I was 17 years old. So it was like losing, a family member. It was huge for me. I was 32 when I came into recovery rooms. And OA helped me quite a bit. I would say that I didn't find any specifically queer meetings within OA until I had moved to New York, which I did in 2014. And then within a few years, I was going to AA meetings. And there I did I sort of did what Barsha talked about. I looked in the book, I found some queer meetings. I went to women's meetings. It took me being in women's rooms to realize I didn't feel very comfortable in rooms only of women, partly because I feel out of place in women's groups. I'm not, I don't identify as a woman. But it was, coming to New York and being able to find those rooms that was helpful. And I don't want to step on some of the questions that I know are coming up in tonight's show, but some of the early suggestions that I got, for instance, of women sticking with women and men sticking with men, were confusing to me and difficult to follow. But I certainly felt like I found acceptance as a struggling alcoholic. I just didn't always talk about, my gender identity or sexual identity at the beginning.
Tasha, I will jump in here. I attend a couple different meetings, and one specifically are pretty staunch about women need to work with women, men need to work with men, period. And I have taken this as a teaching moment that, that's not effective for everyone. And let me explain to you why that may or may not be. And so for us to just blanket that term out there can really isolate some people. So, let's cool that down a little bit. That was my recommendation. I understand where you're coming from, but it might not be effective for everybody that might be in the rooms. And so Adrian, how about you? I'm going to go the same question with you as well. What was it like for you? What's your sober date, by the way?
My sobriety date is December 19th of 2021. I had a relapse then. I went out for 3 days, and before that I had almost 2 years.
Okay, so in 2021, you're in pandemic time, I suppose, right? Mm-hmm. Was this in Zoom or were you face-to-face at this time in December of 2021?
It was mostly Zoom. Before then, I mentioned I'd been in the rooms for a few years before that and had been sober for almost 2 years when I relapsed. And so I had started going to a few in-person meetings around that time. But the first time I got sober in 2020, it was almost all Zoom.
Adrian, when you came in, did you go that first meeting? Did you go to specifically an LGBTQIA plus meeting, or did you just go to some generic type?
No, I just my first meeting was actually in 2016. My mom sort of forced me to go to it. And it was in Kansas. And it was just a regular meeting. And at the time, I wasn't really open to hearing the message. It was sort of just like, I'm going to do this because my mom is making me. And when I started going to meetings more regularly in New York, it was still at a time where I wasn't really willing to fully admit to myself that I was queer. When I would drink, I was able to admit that, but other times not really. And so most of the meetings I went to, I didn't really seek out queer meetings at the time when I first came into the rooms. And so it was mostly just regular meetings where a lot of those same suggestions I had a hard time.
So when you were coming in, you weren't, fully yourself, so to say, coming into those meetings at first. Did you find yourself having difficulty relating or not so much? What was that experience like? Were you looking at the room and saying, there's nobody here really like me?
Yeah, but I did that for a lot of different reasons. Apart from, my gender and sexuality, I think, I think one thing is definitely when I first came into the rooms, I did have a hard time with that idea of men sticking with men and women sticking with women. Just because for the most part, like most of my close relationships were close friendships were with women. And I had a hard time opening up to men. And so I initially had a really hard time with that suggestion, and it kept me from actually getting a sponsor the first year or so when I was coming around into the rooms. And it's no surprise, like I sort of just kept relapsing around that time. But I ultimately got to a point where just the gift of desperation, sort of, where I was in a treatment facility, a long-term treatment facility. And, a lot of those things where I was like, I don't want to have a male sponsor. I don't want to reach out to other men in the program. I realized like this was life or death for me. And so I sort of had to quiet a lot of those things. And that helped me a lot in terms of just being able to relate to more people and realize, I'm not as different as I think.
Adrian, it's so important that I hear these things, that it's a life and death situation. It really is. I know that by personal experience. My son, who took me to my first meeting, helped me get sober. We did all kinds of things together. It is a life or death situation because a lot of good things happened in his life because of recovery. But this disease is profound, and he did relapse and die. And so it is a life and death situation, but recovery is possible for everyone, even for everyone. It's possible for everyone. But I think what I'm hearing you saying, that getting a sponsor was pretty important to you as far as putting some long-term sobriety in your pocket. Would you say that's true? So
Yeah,
how
definitely.
did you find a sponsor coming from the situation that you're in?
Well, I wasn't able to get any actual like time together until I went into a long-term treatment facility. I was sort of just constantly in and out. Spent a lot of time in hospitals and institutions, and so when I ultimately got to that point where I was looking for a sponsor, I was in a treatment facility, so it was kind of hard. There was a lot of limits in terms of like they would only let me go to 2 meetings a week and things like that. But it was around the beginning of 2020 when I was still in that facility that the pandemic happened. And so it was like this horrible thing, but almost like a gift for me because like I was able to access so many meetings. You know, around that time, I just sort of kept sharing in meetings. Like I'm new to the program. I'm fairly desperate. I'm in a treatment facility. I need a sponsor. And, you know, at that point, I was willing to work with anyone that would be willing to work with me. And so that was sort of how it
Adrian,
happened.
do I understand you to say that you found your sponsor through Zoom, through online platform?
Yeah.
So that's awesome. You know, it's possible to find a sponsor in all different kinds of ways. It's not, you know, it's not always face-to-face, but it can be effective, is what I'm hearing you say, is to be able to identify and to find someone even through Zoom. Correct? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, again, so if you want to get plugged into Zoom, email, and you're not sure how to do that, just email me, mark@recoveredcast.com, and I'll plug you into the right resources. I'm going to go to you, Barsha, the same question. What was it like for you coming into the rooms for the first time?
I came in a very odd higher power way, which is why I have no problem with higher power. Somebody called me and said, I'm on the 20th floor of a building. I'm going to jump off because I'm an alcoholic. And I said, I know where meetings are because I had been around it for a while, but I'd never gone in. I came and I started taking that person to meetings. And by the end of the day, we stayed in meetings all day. I realized they were talking about me. And I came in very angry. Yeah. So, but I know it was higher power because 3 days before that, on August 31st, like I said, my sobriety date was September 3rd. On August 31st, I knew it was over. I had one of those spiritual experiences, and I stayed dry for those 3 days, and then that higher power thing happened. And so I count my sobriety date as the day I came in, not the day of my last drink. Yeah. So yeah, I came in and I did not, my best sponsor was my first sponsor was a man, straight man. I did not take that suggestion from day one because I, of course, was attracted at that time more to women. I'm pan too, but I thought, no, I'm not going to get a female sponsor. I'm going to get a crush on her. It's going to be a whole nightmare. So I did the opposite of what they said, and it worked out really, really great. And I've had a lot of sponsors, but I would say I did not take that suggestion. I think for me, it's all about learning how your higher power communicates with you ultimately. So I think that the little by little trusting my gut really helped me because I would pick somebody and I would say, that's either right. I'd work with them as long as I could until my gut really said, I'm growing. I'm actually growing and I've outgrown this person. Doesn't mean the person's a bad person or anything. It's just like, I need something else. And as I came into my own as a queer person, I actually changed sponsors is what happened.
Barsha, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into your story here because you said you came in angry.
Okay.
And I don't think that's unusual.
I came in angry.
I don't care where you're coming from, you know, but resentment is the number one offender, right? So what were you so angry about and how'd you deal with that?
I was, I'm a low-level spiritual seeker. But, I mean, alcohol and drugs to me are low-level spiritual search, because I just wanted a shift in perspective a lot of the time. I didn't want to always end up where I ended up. I just wanted I needed a perspective shift, And so then I thought, when I came in and started listening, that it was about the feelings, not the facts of everyone's life. And I identify with every feeling. I was angry at I said, this is what I am. I don't have to be anything else. I am this. And in a sense, it was a relief as well as the anger around it. Because I was like, because, I was 1980. A lot of my friends had died. We went through AIDS, it wasn't. And it was that, I have to say, had a lot to do with getting sober too. Because it was like, I saw people, passing away, in my community. And so I was like, I'm grateful for my life. And why am I doing this to myself over and over again? And I just, that perspective of being in an epidemic like that, in New York City, was just really played into my sobriety a lot. Not to mention the fact that I was cast in a show at that time where everyone was drinking in the show. It was about a wedding. And the audience was all drinking and getting drunk and everything. And I thought, either I'm going to survive in this job or I'm not going to survive, so I better get sober. So that's what I was angry about. It's like, now I can't participate in the fun. I have to be in this show and be sober and watching everybody else get drunk. But it was a good sobriety job.
But it's so interesting. So much of life, so much of recovery is two sides of one coin. You can be angry and yet relieved at the same time. I could be angry about this, but you know what? This is so much a better way of life. And so we can celebrate and acknowledge both sides of that same coin. Right now, I shared with you guys a little bit earlier, this is petty compared to the serious topic that we're in. But you know what? I just lost our dear pet. My cat, Yukon Cornelius, passed away on Sunday, 2 days ago. And I am so filled with happy, sad, so sad. But I'm sad because I love. And so I flip the coin and live on the love side. That's where I try to live. But I acknowledge that I am grieving. And so much in recovery is that way. That's the beautiful thing about recovery. It gives us those tools to be able to feel the feels, acknowledge them, but we have tools to be able to cope in all ways. And so that's why this topic is important. This topic is so important because we have to learn how to cope, whoever we are, in this life of recovery and live our true selves. I'm doing it every day. Everybody does it, but this is unique. And that's why I want to explore this, because it's so important. I'm getting involved in the organization here locally called Ozone House. And it's specifically a reach out, a safe place for teen trans runaways. And so, I'm really putting some resources into that. I'm making my time available. I haven't really got into it too much, but it's so important because there is an at-risk population so much. I do know that. And so, I don't know how I got out.
Yeah, when you come into the rooms, and you're already marginalized in your identity in a certain way, and then you're othered in a certain way, and in many other ways, then you come in, and then you're like, now I'm getting sober. And I'm trying to find my way through my own identity. And because alcoholism is a self-diagnosed disease, it is extremely similar to self-diagnosing, quote unquote, your gender and sexual identity for me. And no, people had labeled me gay before I did, but you can't, people, you're an alcoholic doesn't mean anything. You have to be able to say, I'm an alcoholic. So to me, it's the double whammy of self-diagnosis of your disease, as well as really proclaiming your identity and your sexuality.
Tasha, we're going to jump into this concept of terminal uniqueness. I think all of us as individuals are unique, but there's such a thing as becoming terminally unique. What about that struggle with you? How do you acknowledge your uniqueness, and specifically as your sexuality and as well as your gender identity, that uniqueness, and how do you fight against being terminally unique, or how can that situation propel you into being terminally unique. I'd like to get some of your thoughts about this. I'll just turn it over to you and let you go with it where you will.
Sure. Yeah. I think this was one of the questions that most grabbed my attention because it was such a struggle at the beginning. I think I'm not unique in the sense that coming into the rooms, I too certainly was angry, was grieving in some ways, but a lot of what provoked my ire was the language in the big book. And some of the suggestions that I received as well that we've already talked about. But there's a lot of organization in AA and in other 12 steps rooms that is gendered in the sense of, God is frequently referred to as male in the big book. And the alcoholics who are described in the big book as being, for instance, very grandiose, who believe that they never do anything wrong, who, blame everybody else for their problems. That was not my experience. That was not my experience. And so it was very difficult for me at first to just feel comfortable and to, I think, maybe all of us struggled with this feeling of like, am I now accepting things? Because, okay, listen, I came up in the world as a female. I was socialized female. And I've always been told by male society and patriarchy that my experience, that I don't know my own experience, that what I have to say doesn't matter as much, that so much so that I'm not going to get paid equally. Like there's all these levels in society at which, my experience is devalued. And now I'm walking into a structure in which everything is male dominated, or I shouldn't say everything, but the language certainly can be male dominated. And it was very confusing. Like I do need to follow suggestions and get help in order to save my life. But I don't want to kind of make my higher power now this sort of new, patriarchal organization instead of alcohol or instead of whatever it had been. So, it was a real challenge. And I think for me, when I looked at this question, the first thing that came out to me is I need fellows who understand and accept me, whoever they are. Because at the beginning, what I did was I found a sponsor who understood and accepted me unconditionally as a queer person and as someone who at that time, I didn't identify as non-binary when I first walked into AA, but I knew that my gender was odd. And I was able to explain to her, look, I don't feel comfortable with a lot of the gendered language here. I don't feel comfortable in rooms full of women. So please don't tell me just to go to women's meetings. But she was a woman. And she totally accepted me. And she told me, take out your big book. Every time it says God, he, change that to she, or change it to they, or change it to whatever you need, because your higher power can be anything that you want it to be. And I related to the conversation that like what Adrienne and Barsha said earlier about sponsorship, because for me, I had a cis straight woman as a sponsor for the first 3 years of my recovery. And then as I became more aware that I needed someone who understood queer identity, non-binary identity more, once I kind of discovered who I was, I needed to find a sponsor who fit those, who understood non-binary and was queer themselves. And so that's what I did. That was very helpful to me. So today, I'll say, almost 6 years sober, God willing, I'll have 6 years in December. Now, if I'm struggling with that question of like, am I just being contrary because I'm an alcoholic in this situation? Or do I need to, or is this a legitimate concern, for me? Then I'll check in with that sponsor. I'll check in with other queer fellows who are in recovery so that I can check my own thinking, just as I would check my thinking because I'm an alcoholic anyway. So I think that's helpful for me, having other people to check my thoughts and reactions against, and always being honest about what I'm feeling, not trying to keep it inside and deal with it in my head.
Adrienne, let's move into this idea of knowing our true selves. And hopefully that's not an offensive term, but I'm going to go with it anyway. But how did coming into recovery, how did embracing the program help you become more true to yourself?
Well, I do think, I mean, there's just an inevitable part if you, you know, come into recovery and start working the steps and start hearing other experiences from meetings. There is a layer of honesty that's just unavoidable. And so for me, you know, I came into the rooms and it was sort of, I met this person at a meeting. It was a queer woman who shared that she was queer with me. And it was just odd. It came out in a phone call where I was just like, I shared that I have always like questioned my sexuality and also my gender. You know, they talk a lot in AA about like how, I don't know, when you do things like the fourth step, like it can be like a huge weight off your chest. I do think for me, it was that moment where I was not only willing to admit it to someone else, but actually being able to fully admit it to myself, that I felt that weight come off of me. And it really was something where I was like, okay, yeah, I understand what people are saying in terms of when they come into recovery and when they start to get honest, like a lot of like just like the rock drops in a lot of ways. And so that is how it felt for me. But, you know, finding out who I am and trying to explore that, it's an ongoing thing. And I don't think it's something that ever really ends. I had a lot of difficulty in my first year, even after I came out, to other people and found queer spaces, still trying to figure out and identify what I was, because a lot of these things like gender and sexuality, they exist on a spectrum. And I think that's, you know, just going back to the part about being terminally unique, I think I'm always someone that is constantly trying to fight against that. And so for me, you know, it's this weird thing of realizing that, you know, I'm in recovery and I can be whoever I want to be. But also like a lot of these things that I've been told, you know, make me different from other people or other me. They don't actually. And it's more of an issue, I think, with a lot of other people, in terms of like not wanting to be honest with themselves, because there is no one that is, there are very few people that are like strictly, you know, one sexuality or another. There are very few people that like feel strictly one gender or another. If you ask someone what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, you will get a million different answers. And so, you know, for me, it's like an ongoing process in terms of like understanding myself, but, you know, just waking up and having to constantly make that promise to be honest with myself every day, and realize like I'm not always going to have like a single answer to that.
You know, the program talks about rigorous honesty. And, you know, coming from my perspective, it's like tell the truth and do these things that are true. But I also have to be honest. I think we all have to be honest about ourselves, right? I have to be honest about myself. I'm selfish, self-centered, insecure, these types of persons. And I think the program, I know the program for me, especially through the 4-step, laid that all out for me, how these being dishonest was bad for me, which ended up drinking. So what I'm hearing from you, also being honest about who your true self is an important part of staying sober. Would you say that's true?
It is, definitely.
What about the person that, would you, I'm wondering about the person that is not being honest with themselves regarding their sexuality or their gender identity. It's got to be a lot more difficult getting clean. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I would. I think, I'm still unsure whether that was, the single reason why it was difficult for me to get sober. But I do think there was, looking back for me, I do think I would have picked up again had I not gotten honest about a lot of these things. Because it's very hard to be sober and to constantly suppress a lot of those feelings that for me at least, I knew that I had either consciously or subconsciously since I was a kid. And so, I think it is something that is really challenging and poses a lot of difficulty for so many queer people in terms of getting sober and also just finding resources as we've talked before. But I do think for me it's something where I needed to come out. It was vital to my sobriety, to me staying sober, to come out.
Barsha, I'm going to let you have the platform a little bit here. Get on the soapbox a little bit here, because we've explored you guys as individuals and things like that. But I'm curious. Again, I'm curious about these things. Barsha, I'm wondering what suggestions would you give so that the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever 12-step can be more
I'm going to answer that question, but I just want to piggyback 1 second on the terminal uniqueness, just for a second, and then I'll answer. Because I did want to say that for me, as I get more sober, just like they say there's a bridge back to life, that AA is a bridge back to life, AA also can be a bridge back to uniqueness if you combine it with gratitude for your gifts. And as you create more of a relationship with your higher power, instead of talking about terminal uniqueness, you can say, I'm grateful for who I am as a unique individual. I just want to put in a plug for that, because it's not a bad thing, only when it's terminally unique. But uniqueness is a good thing as you get to know each other, yourselves. I would say, first of all, Zoom meetings. I would never discourage anybody. I heard of a meeting where someone said, can you please remove your pronouns off your Zoom name? And that is not cool to me. If somebody chooses in a Zoom meeting to put their pronouns on, what is it any bother to you? That is one way to be more, that was a terrible thing that I heard. I couldn't believe it. Someone was asked to remove their pronouns. Yes.
What the fuck?
Right.
It's very
it's as important as saying my name is Barsha and I'm an alcoholic.
Someone that's listening right now says
you're saying my name is Barsha and my pronouns are she they.
Why
you're telling somebody, and you can't speak in a meeting, so you're on a screen. And it's important to recognize when people come into their own identity, or they want to be addressed a certain way, or even looked at a certain way, because you can't tell gender from appearance. That's the whole point, and that's hard. I maybe understand, but gender is not contingent upon appearance or how you perceive a person. It's how a person perceives themselves. So I would just say it is that important. I mean, that's just for me.
Ding,
and
ding,
remember,
ding.
I come from a place, I do have a partner that is non-binary, transmasculine, and this is a new thing. My partner did not come out to me till they were 50. And it's important for me, since my partner chooses not to take any pronoun, that everybody's journey is different. Just because they're non-binary, they don't care about being called they. But that's what I'm saying. Everyone's an individual. So if a person is putting on a Zoom name their individual identity, why would you rob them of that? So that's a big thing with inclusivity. As far as in-person meetings go, that's a good question. I want to give you kudos for actually having this podcast and bringing this topic, because you, to me, are an ally. immediately by even doing the service of this meeting. I just need to say that. So dialogue to me is always important. People walking and treating anybody in the room equally. And I don't know in the time of COVID, but before we used to have a greeter like at meetings, and welcome everybody. And I think that it would be amazing after a meeting as well. If you see that someone feels out of place or they share something that might be that people would shun them, go right up to them and say, welcome. That's all you have to do. Because I think welcoming a person to a place where it's hard to admit that you are is an important thing, no matter what gender or sexuality you are.
Something that just came to mind is that we all, I assume we have home groups, and home groups, we have group conscious meetings, and we set up little committees and little chairs. And maybe one effective chair is for someone to be an LGBTQIA.
I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Advocate.
That's raises
someone that's there specifically.
Slight red flag with me. Only because.
And at least to be able to monitor
special
what's going
interest
on, or
within a
if there's some need in the
non-special
room.
interest
I'm wondering
meeting
about that.
can be
I think-
a point of contention
came
for
to
some
mind.
people in the room.
What about other?
You know what I mean? It's like, I think seeking out, like we all spoke about on this podcast, seeking out the meetings where you feel safe is better than imposing that necessarily on a meeting. But I love you for thinking about it. Yeah. No, I do not consider it condescending. I'm just thinking about group consciousness. That's all in that one situation. I don't know, Tasha, Adrian, what do you think?
Okay. Well, it's a little condescending, would you say? Is that, no? Okay. All right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have a different suggestion. So, which is really just picking up the preamble as it has been changed by the General Service Organization. So we now have a preamble that says Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people, right? Rather than a fellowship of men and women. Because immediately to me as a trans non-binary person, I am a person, but I do not identify as a man or a woman. And now that that change has already happened a couple of years ago now, when I walk into a meeting and I hear the preamble, I can take that as a litmus test for whether or not I'm going to feel safe in that meeting. When I hear the preamble read and it says people, rather than the old version of the preamble, I feel included and I feel comfortable in that meeting. So that's helpful for me.
Adrian, do you have any thoughts on these topics? Allies, environment?
Yeah. So I will say I have been to, I'm not sure if I'm the person Barsha's referring to, but I was at a meeting a few months ago where I was asked to remove my pronouns from my Zoom name. And I asked the host what that even, or like why, and was told we don't have them at this meeting. And I asked him what that means. And then I was kicked out of the meeting. Now I do want to say, like, I've been to hundreds of Zoom meetings. That is the first time and only time it's ever happened to me. So to anyone that maybe is nervous about that, it's a very rare thing. But in terms of like allyship, I do think just so many people, like, they look at a lot of these things like pronouns, gender identity, they look at them in like political ways. Like they think we're trying to politicize certain things or bring certain political issues into the rooms, when it's really, we're just trying to feel included. And it is not our fault that certain things have become politicized in society. We're just asking that in certain language that you include us, because things like when we're saying men and women, some of us do not identify as men or women. And so that is not a political thing. That is just us seeking inclusion and to belong, just like every other alcoholic in the program. And so I think, I 100% agree with what Tasha suggested. And also I feel like for a lot of people, they need to stop thinking about it so like black and white in terms of like, I do not believe in pronouns, or I don't, and start thinking about it as how can I be the most accepting to any newcomer that comes in? How can I be of maximal service to any newcomer that comes in, regardless of who they are?
You know what, Adrian? The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, right? And this circle within Alcoholics Anonymous, anyway, I'll talk about that because that is the fellowship that I'm a member of, and I know a little bit about the history. And that initial group was very unique in that they were white businessmen. And that language comes through in the big book, that's for certain. And so the next widening of that circle was women, bringing women into the group. Was that even going to be allowed? Dr. Bob had a big problem with that and didn't think so. But the only desire, or the only requirement, is a desire to stop drinking. And then it widened out into minorities, African Americans specifically. And that the one person in particular was African American heroin addict. And they actually called Bill W. about this. And his response to this was, of course he can be in the meeting. Does he have a desire to stop drinking? The answer was yes. And he said, of course that person is welcome to this meeting. And we have to, I always have to remember that. And we widen that circle out because lives are at stake. We opened up this program that this is a deadly disease. And I don't want any barriers to be in the way for someone that has a desire to stop drinking, because that will save lives. Simple. That will save lives. And I don't want to be in the way of that. As a matter of fact, I want to be the gateway to someone feeling safe, feeling included, being part of. And the best thing that I can do is become more and more familiar with people that are not like me. Because now they're people, they're just like me with the same sort of problems, issues, just like me. You know, and so we all unique individuals. We come to this place in different ways, but the only requirement is a desire to stop drinking. It's as simple as that. And I don't want to be any barrier in that way. And I know I have been in the past. I mean, it's important for me to acknowledge that. I come into this program with certain bias, certain prejudice. And if I don't recognize that, I could be a barrier that kills people. And I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that person. Not anymore. Not anymore. Tasha, you know the Recovered podcast is really about the new person in recovery. And we were specifically, I want you to address that person that is LGBTQIA plus. What would you say to the new person that is thinking that drinking and drugging has been a problem? What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is you are absolutely not alone. You know, as your intro mentioned, this is a disease that disproportionately impacts trans people, queer people. So you're not alone in that. And a lot of the kind of social spaces for queer folks have centered around drinking and using as well. And there's plenty of us in recovery. So I just wanted to re-echo what Barsha had said earlier in the show about getting yourself on Zoom meetings. In addition to the 24-hour AA, I would say, you know, we know that queer folks often move to urban areas. So if you check out intergroups like the New York intergroup or Los Angeles intergroup or Chicago intergroup and search for meetings like LGBTQIA interest meetings, trans meetings, whatever it is you're looking for, you will be able to find it there. And get yourself then connected to fellows. So you want to, if you have the opportunity in the meeting, sometimes they'll say, you know, please introduce yourself if you're new to this meeting, or you might have an opportunity to put your phone number in the chat or get phone numbers from other people. Try to make contact one-to-one with other queer people in recovery, because it can help you so much to not feel as alone. That has been huge for me, getting to talk with other people who know what it's like to be queer and in recovery.
Oh.
After a short...
I'm screwing this all up. I have to edit this.
Coming up next.
This Week in Recovery, where we talk about what's going on at the home group and what's going on in the family room.
Don't touch that dial.
This Week in Recovery, and this is our opportunity, Tasha, to talk about what's going on in the home group, what's going on in your personal life. What's going on in your life, Tasha? What's happening?
Oh my goodness. What is going on
Not
in my life?
podcasting, as I understand it, unfortunately. I'm glad you're here tonight, but you're busy.
I am so glad to be here tonight. But yeah, I've been teaching on Tuesday evenings, so I have been wrapped up. I'm teaching a really interesting class on women in Latin America, which has been super
in your wheelhouse.
fun. Yeah. So that's been great. I have been spending half my time in rural Pennsylvania with my partner out there, found some good in-person meetings out there, and looking forward to the winter holidays already because I'll go out west to be able to see my mom in Oregon. Great. So, yeah.
How about you, Adrian? This is our opportunity to let folks know that there's life outside the program, but what's going on in your life? What's going on in your home group? What do you got?
So I'm I haven't mentioned this. I'm a middle school math teacher, awesome. And so that every day is new and challenging, and the past few weeks have just been a lot in terms of reaching a point in the school year where the kids are really starting to act up. So that's always brings my stress level up, and definitely means I need more meetings. Just in terms of home group, I think for the most part, just trying to stay plugged in and stay connected with other fellows in the program while working. I think a challenge that I ran into last year with this job is teaching can take up so much of your life. And I did get a bit disconnected from the program. And so the challenge for me has been just realizing, I can't show up for the kids or anything if I am not sober. And so just constantly reminding myself of that, because it's something that is hard to establish like a good work-life balance with.
You are not alone, Adrian.
Well, I'd like to put a plug in. My home group is actually called Gender Fabulous.
Fellows as well, because I get preoccupied with other things.
And it's every weekday at 12 noon, and I try to get to it as much as possible. Also,
you,
I'm a composer, and something new in my sobriety. I usually work in theater, but I scored a short animated film, and that was really fun. And I've continued to, with my collaborator, doing a teaser for that now and putting that out. And I am just really at a different point in my sobriety. I'm going back to basics in a lot of different ways, because after all these 1 days at a times for this many years, I am grateful for time on the planet as well as time in the program.
Awesome. All right, listeners, you've heard what we think about being LGBTQIA plus in recovery. Now we want to hear what you think. So I'm going to go to you, Adrian, but we did ask our listeners about this topic. Now, listeners, if you'd like to participate in these weekly surveys, just email me for an invitation, mark@recoveredcast.com, and I'll send you an invitation to our Recovered Cast Google group, and this group receives the show notes for the upcoming show. You'll also receive an invitation to participate in the weekly surveys, and you'll also receive a link to call into the show so you can share your experience with us on this topic. All right, again, to get involved, just email me, mark@recoveredcast.com to get involved. All right, I'm going to go to you, Adrian. We did ask our listeners, are you or any of your recovery fellows members of the LGBTQIA plus community? And what do you think? What percentage do you think said, yep, I either am or I know somebody?
I would say
70% is optimistic. It's 57%. And actually, a big number here, 20% said no. And that was a little bit surprising because I don't know was one option. So that's interesting, right? So hopefully this has been informative to a lot of our audience. All right. We don't have phone calls, but our phone call segment is brought to you by our Recovered Podcast Sustaining Partners. Our sustaining partners are a big part in our self-supporting movement. This week, Martin, Becky, Kim, Shelly, Jim, Schez, Vicki, and Penny. Well, they made their sustaining partner monthly donations. So thank you very much, Martin, Becky, Kim, Shelly, Jim, Schez, Vicki, and Penny. Now, you can become a sustaining partner by giving on a monthly basis for 1 year. And as an expression of our gratitude for your donation, we'll send you Recovered Podcast merchandise like t-shirts, coffee mugs, water bottles, and such. Just go to our website, recoveredcast.com, and tap on the Sustaining Partners button for more information. But thanks again, Martin, Becky, Kim, Shelly, Jim, Schez, Vicki, and Penny. All right, as a result of our recent group conscious meeting, now it's not so recent anymore because that was during pandemic, but we have adopted a value for value policy, and we want to be of service to the Recovered Podcast community. So anything we offer on our website, we will send to you. If you want a t-shirt, a coffee mug, or a water bottle, if you want Gigi's book, Worry Less Now, just email me, mark@recoveredcast.com, and let us know what you want and where to mail it. Now, we will order and mail those things to you for no set free or price. All we ask you to consider is how much value you receive from the items chosen and the value of our work. Only you can determine how much our work at RecoveredCast is worth to you and send us the monetary equivalent through our website, recoveredcast.com/donation. All right. If you have experience, we want you to call right now, but unfortunately, we don't have any phone calls. So this has been great. Thank you very much, Adrian, Barsha, Tasha. I really appreciate getting to know you and getting to know you a little bit better. I was so nervous.
Thank you. I'm going to give you a bell.
At my podcast. I am so in my element right here. Right now I am.
I am.
So
but I just hit.
Making me feel
I just hit.
No,
you don't have to plug my podcast. But I just hit my little bell, my Buddhist bell. So you got a Buddhist
look
bell.
At you. Now you've got all kinds of equipment there. You a podcaster? Are you Barsha? All right, plug it. What do you got? What? All right. I'm feeling blessed. All right. So remember, abandon yourself to God and admit your faults, clear away of the wreckage of the past and give freely. God bless and see you next time.